I have one question for you. How you like them apples? What about them apples? Or them apples? Warning if you like them apples. Growing them costs $100 a year, plus $1 for every tree you buy, 20 cents per tree in the 4th through 10th years you have them, and 30 cents per tree every year thereafter. Assuming you're a commercial grower. Otherwise, you cannot plant them apples. Them apples are Evercrisps, which are what's known as a club apple, a variety whose growing, picking, packaging, and sales are meticulously managed by Maya. No, Maya, the Midwest Apple Improvement Association. Yep, this apple, as a grocery store product, has more in common with this abomination than this one. It might have even more in common with its distant second cousin. Look at these Apple products' websites side by side and you'll see a lot of the same stuff. Trademarks, camel case, use of the word innovate. The big difference, this Apple cranks out new models every year. The Evercrisp, from crossbreeding to market, took 19 years. But why all this hoopla? How did apples, unlike any of their neighbors in the produce aisle, become such a branded business? The answer, in a way, is that Honeycrisps hit the scene and were so dang delicious that the entire business shifted around them. But to understand exactly how that happened, we gotta head back to tree school. Welcome to Tree School, where today's lesson comes to you via Dr. Susan Brown, the head of Cornell University's apple breeding program, who was kind enough to respond to our emails. Apples grow on trees. No, not like that. Roughly none of the apples you've ever bought grew like that. Why? Well, because delicious apple seeds may not make delicious apple trees for the same rough genetic reason that you're not an identical clone of your dad or your siblings. Instead, it'll make a tree with half the genes of your delicious apple and half from whatever tree's pollen happened to float by, and those genes may, or critically may not, produce an apple that tastes anything like yours. Rather than take that chance, apple growers graft branches of proven trees onto rootstock in the ground, resulting in genetic clones of their best apples. But what if you want better than your best? You want crispier, sweeter, redder, bigger. Maybe you want it to ripen earlier in the season or later. Maybe you want it more tolerant of cold or heat. Maybe you want it more resistant to disease, or for its trees to produce more apples at a time. To make a new variety, you hand-pollinate the flowers of one good tree with pollen from another, then bag the flower so no other pollen sneaks in. You collect the seeds that grow there, plant them in a nursery, then graft seedlings onto rootstock to grow a tree. You'll make many, many thousands of trees out of this crossbreed, and in 4 or 5 years, you'll have apples to test. You'll propagate the best of the best to make a new generation while terminating the rest, then rinse and repeat this process for several more generations to weed out any that turn out to be susceptible to disease, or sunburn, or storing badly, or any other of a number of, quote, fatal flaws. Of tens of thousands of trees sampled over multiple decades, you might end up with one commercially viable apple. In 1960, in Minnesota, they did about 30 crossbreeds, including one that created a tree called MN1711, which struggled in the winter of 1976. Nevertheless, the UMN staff cloned it to try again. By 1982, those clones hadn't impressed and were set for termination. But a horticulturalist named David Bedford gave them another shot because he felt they grew in bad conditions. Under better ones, he discovered, they made pretty great apples. Those apples, as we know them now, are Honeycrisps. Honeycrisps were released in 1991 and really took off in 2007. What sets them apart is their large cells that literally burst when you bite into them, while lesser apples' smaller cells just cleave off. It's the titular crisp. The University of Minnesota got a US patent for the tree, and for as long as that patent existed, they got $1.30 for every Honeycrisp tree sold, for a total of over $6 million brought in before the patent expired in 2008, not to mention a few million more in sales rights in other countries. Now, an important thing to know is that a Honeycrisp tree is a finicky creature. For starters, its wood breaks easily, it needs hand thinning, it's susceptible to black rot and fire blight, and like many Minnesotans, it doesn't handle heat easily. Also, the apples have pointy stems and thin skin, so if you pick a bunch and throw them in a box, they'll poke holes in each other. All this makes growing Honeycrisps, well, pretty expensive. You need to buttress the tree, trim, treat for diseases, pray for good weather, and snip all those stems. UMN patented the Honeycrisp and got royalties off it, but it was what's called an open variety, meaning anyone could buy it and plant it and grow it and sell it however they want, which creates a branding problem. If you invented the Honeycrisp, and now some percentage of the apples being sold under that name are grown suboptimally, lack its signature texture, or taste like nothing, that's not great for your apple. In the wake of the Honeycrisp's success, many an apple breeder sought an apple as good as the Honeycrisp or better, a way to maintain that apple's consistency and keep making money off of it after the patent expired. Enter the Club Apple. See, patents expire, trademarks don't. If I cook up a variety called Half as Apple and throw down a patent and trademark, I don't just charge you a royalty for buying a tree, I can also charge a royalty for selling the apples under the name Half as Apple. And in order to let you buy the tree in the first place, I can require you pay into a Half as Apple Growers Cooperative that ensures my standards of tree and apple care in exchange for the right to use the name. So many of the Honeycrisp 2.0s floating out there aren't just slightly tastier or more heat resistant, they're managed with the intensity of a budding K-pop star to raise money and keep the brand steady for their breeders and growers. Clubs also set new varieties up for success. We asked Dr. Brown whether she prefers her new varieties to hit the market as open or managed varieties, and she mentioned that a Club Apple's centralized marketing budget does wonders to actually get it off the ground. Cornell's Snapdragon variety partnered with the Buffalo Bills, making them the only Apple NFL partnership out there, at least until my deal with the Bengals go through. She also said this was a great question, which means my writer gets to keep her healthcare this month. Congrats, Amy! To celebrate, she headed out to support her local apple growers on my dime. This farm had plenty of open varieties, but over to the side, they had a cool kids table for club varieties. We've got the Evercrisp, the Snapdragon, the Ruby Frost, and the Ludacrisp. Like the Evercrisp and Amy herself, Ludacrisp hails from the greater Columbus metro area towards the end of the 20th century. It has the same subscription and royalty costs as Evercrisp. Both Ruby Frost and Snapdragon were bred at Cornell and are now managed by Crunch Time Apple Growers, a New York State grower cooperative with exclusive rights to these two apple brands. Growers pay a fee for every tree they purchase, every acre they plant, and every bushel they sell. So to grow this table's worth of apples, the farm had to pay co-op fees to 2 different orgs in 2 different states, one of whom passed those fees onto Cornell University. But the question remains, are they good? And, well, yeah. The Evercrisp is like a perfect Honeycrisp, in a way. The Snapdragon was tangy and gave Amy the brute strength of a linebacker. Ruby Frost was a bit tougher, but good and good looking. Ludacrisp kinda tasted like a pineapple. It's no wonder it takes decades to invent these. I just tried a Half as Apple and I'm worried it's a cricket ball. But while you're waiting for Half as Apple to drop, why not check out this video's sponsor, Nebula. Nebula is a creator-owned streaming service home to many of your faves' ad-free videos, bonus content, early releases, and more. It's also home to Nebula Originals, our slate of creator-led passion projects that are frankly too expensive and/or risky to make for YouTube. Now, usually I would talk about the wide swath of originals from so many creators Nebula has on offer, but today I'm gonna talk about me! The comedic minds behind this very channel have just premiered a Nebula-exclusive comedy debate show called Abolish Everything. It's fun, it's dumb, it includes lines like this.
The only way to stop a bad guy with a speakerphone is a good guy with a speakerphone.
We're all really proud of it, and you can only see it on Nebula, which, by the way, is also the only place to get early Jetlag episodes and our Jetlag recap podcast, The Layover, or our entirely separate game show, The Getaway. So what are you still doing here? Head to nebula.tv/HAI for 40% off an annual subscription. Just $36 for the year, and watch Abolish Everything right frickin' now.